All right, everybody ready for the English portion of the day? All right. The topic is the moral and practical case for capitalism, and I want to start off by doing something that is rarely done in political discourse, and that is I'm going to define my terms. By capitalism, I mean the system of individual rights. The system of individual rights, including property rights, in which all property is privately owned. That is Ayn Rand's definition, and I think it's accurate. To put it simply, capitalism is the system of individual rights. It protects my right, your right, the right. Capitalism, properly understood and applied, protects the right of each individual, either gender, regardless of race or nationality. Protects if we combine the formulations from John Locke and Thomas Jefferson, an individual's inalienable rights to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. So individual rights applies in both the sphere of personal morality and in the sphere of economics. An individual has the right to freedom of speech, freedom of intellectual expression, freedom of religion, freedom of voting, and also, of course, in the economic sphere, what that means is the right to earn and own property, to own your own land, your own farm, your own business, to make a profit, and of course to retain the profit that you earn. This is the short version of the essence of capitalism. Now, notice, by the way, before we move to socialism, notice that capitalism is misnamed. The proper name for this system, of course, is liberalism. The system of liberty, the system of individual rights. Liberalism does not properly mean mixed economy, semi-socialist welfare state. Liberalism means the system of individual rights, the system of liberty. Notice that capitalism, the name capitalism, is a Marxist term. And historically, less Marx, more Mises. Well, less Marx, more Ayn Rand. But anyway, notice historically, depending on which scholar you read, Marx either coined the term capitalism or he borrowed it from an earlier French socialist. Either way, he certainly popularized it. But notice the meaning here. In Marx's hands, it's the system in which the men of capital, the owning class, have the wealth and the power and use it to oppress the impoverished working class. It's the essence of Marxism is packed. The essence of Marxism, inherent class warfare, is packed into the very name capitalism. And that's why it's a complete and total misnomer. Liberalism is the proper name for the system. Just as Ayn Rand wanted to reclaim the term selfishness, she means not stepping all over innocent people to get what you want, but rather living a life of healthy, rational values, creative values, that which is actually in your self-interest. Just as Ayn Rand wanted to reclaim the term selfish, I want to reclaim the term liberal. Now, socialism has one virtue. It's properly named. It's the system in which your life has been socialized. Your life no longer belongs to you. It belongs to society. It belongs to the state. And the preeminent philosopher of socialism was the German philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And somewhere, I don't have the exact quote in front of me. Hegel, of course, lays the moral and political foundations for both National Socialism, Nazism, and communism. And somewhere in his writings on political philosophy, the philosophy of right, there's just a startling quote from Hegel. Don't forget, Hegel is the leading philosopher of the 19th century. Germany, known as the land of poets and philosophers, one of the most advanced cultures in the history of the world. We have a lot of criticisms we can make of Germany, for sure. But it's also been, and there's nothing, I mean, we can laugh if we want, there's nothing funny about National Socialism. But nevertheless, we have to be objective. Germany, one of the most advanced cultures of history, the land of poets and philosophers. And here's the leading philosopher of the 19th century in the philosophy of right, Hegel's major work on political philosophy, says that, this is not verbatim, but it's a paraphrase of the essence of Hegel, that individuals have no rights, they have only obligations, that our life belongs to the state, all of our lives belong to the state, and if the state calls upon us to sacrifice it, that we must do so. I mean, that's just chilling. That is the essence of socialism, full socialism, real socialism. I don't mean the mixed economy, semi-socialist welfare state we see in many Western nations today. I mean full socialism, real socialism, the Soviet model, the Nazi model, where your life is socialized. Now, excuse me? Hegel's quote? It's not a quote. It's not verbatim. It's a paraphrase. But he says it's in the philosophy of right. You could look it up. Hegel says that our life belongs to the state, and if the state calls upon us to sacrifice it, then we must do so. This from one of the most important and influential political philosophers in history. And you can see this is early 19th century Germany. Hegel, a professor at the University of Jena. Students come from all over Deutschland to study at the feet of Herr Professor Hegel, the great man, take his ideas out into the culture. And you can see where Germany's heading from Hegel's influence towards both National Socialism and through Marx, communism. Now notice most of the systems in the political economic systems of the modern Western world, whether it's Israel or Europe or the United States as well, notice they're overwhelmingly mixed economies. They're a combination of clashing elements, part individual rights, part duties to the state, part capitalism, part socialism, part private ownership, part government controls. There's this pervasive error that many people around the world have, even today in 2018, that the United States is essentially a capitalist system, and that, say, the Scandinavian countries, Sweden is the one that's always trotted out, are essentially socialist. Now, there's a technical term in philosophy for such a claim. It's called bullshit. And thank you. Notice that they're all mixed economies. They're all, including the United States. The United States was very close to a laissez-faire capitalist system, turn of the 20th century. But that was a long time ago. And we've drifted slowly but relentlessly towards socialism for 100 years now. Now notice what I mean by this. Take the United States, first of all. Notice the socialist elements there's still a great deal of individual rights and private ownership and profit-seeking in the United States, thank God. But notice all the socialist elements. The so-called public school system, which is a euphemism for government schools, represents the socialization of the educational system, and it goes back to the mid-19th century. The Federal Reserve System represents the socialization of the money supply. The welfare state represents the socialization of the charity industry, and so forth. So there's a great many socialist elements in the U.S. system, and there have been for decades, going at least as far back as FDR in the 1930s in the New Deal, if not further. Now, if we take Sweden, it's similar. it's a similar mixed economy. Look at all the capitalist elements, or the principle, all the individualist elements in Sweden. Freedom of speech, freedom of intellectual expression, freedom of voting. The borders are open for people who want to emigrate. They're not locked in there like in the former Soviet Union. And even in the economic realm. Notice IKEA, privately owned and operated for profit. Saab, privately owned and operated for profit. Volvo, privately owned and operated for profit. You walk down the streets of Stockholm, it's not that different from my native New York City. All these different stores and shops, butcher, baker, candlestick maker, they're all privately owned and operated for profit. There's an enormous amount of individualism and private ownership, that is, of capitalism in these European mixed economies. They're not that much different. Even before 8 years of President Obama, they weren't that much different. So, now, let me move on. So, this talk is about the moral and practical case for capitalism. So the question for us morally then, if the essence of capitalism is individual rights, the question for us becomes, is the principle and policy of individual rights morally good? Now notice a few preliminary points. One of the great things about the principle of individual rights, that your life belongs to you, that you have an inalienable right to your life, your body, your mind. Notice then that it leads us, properly and fully applied, to ban the initiation of physical force. These I have a right to my own life. If you have a right to your own life and your own body, I cannot assault you. I cannot attack you. I cannot initiate physical force against you. So that the use of physical force is properly used only in retaliation against those who initiated its use. Now, the great thing about the policy of banning the initiation of physical force is it protects our capacity to reason. It protects our reasoning capacity. So this is a great virtue of the principle of individual rights. What that means is we're protected. The proper role of government is to protect our rights, our right to our own life, and specifically to protect us from the initiation of force against us. So individuals are then free to self-actualize. You could tell I admire Aristotle. To self-actualize in every aspect of our lives, to choose what we want to do with our lives. In education, career, romantic love, family, friendship. In all the important areas in our life, we're free to act on our own mind, act on our own judgment, safeguarded from the initiation of physical force against us. The question then is this good? Is this morally good? Is the pursuit of personal happiness good? Many people will be able to live fulfilled lives then, but is that morally good? This is the question of moral philosophy. What makes something good? Call it X. What makes X good? What makes anything good? We need a standard of value, a standard by means of which to assess that something is good. So let's say, for example, that I was to say, working hard and honestly and earning your own living is good. Well, most people would certainly agree with me that working hard and honestly to earn your own living, support yourself, support your children, most people would certainly agree with me that that is good. But the question of moral philosophy is, what makes it good? Is it good because God commanded it of us? Is it good because society says so? Is it good because I feel it in my own emotional life that it's good? What makes it good? Now, if you know the history, and I know we have an educated audience here, if you know the history of Western philosophy, you know the Scottish philosopher David Hume is famous for raising the question, what is the relationship between values and facts? Is there any factual basis for value judgments? Any scientific approach here? Anything objective out here in the world that makes X good? And Hume, of course, a devout empiricist who thought that all knowledge lies in sense experience, David Hume says, I can't see the good in that, Dr. Bernstein. I could see somebody working hard, putting in the effort. I could see them sweating. I could see them getting paid. I could see them go to the bank and put the money in the bank. I could see them working out a budget and everything. I could observe all of that. But where is the good in all of this? I cannot observe the good. If the good is not an item of sense experience, if it's not an element of observation, what that means is there's no factual basis for declaring that X is good, for declaring anything is good, and value judgments of right and wrong, of good and evil, are entirely subjective phenomena. Now, Ayn Rand in Atlas Shrugged and in her nonfiction, The Virtue of Selfishness, one of the reasons that she named her philosophy objectivism is that she revolutionized our understanding of the ought-is question, that values are objective. There is an objective, factual basis for value judgments. It's not just the desires or whims of or emotions of the subject. And Rand does what a genius does here, and that is she reformats the question. The question traditionally was, is there some relationship between values and facts? Rand formats the question. She asks, what is the fundamental fact of reality that gives rise to the entire phenomenon of valuing? Let me repeat that. What is the fundamental fact of reality that gives rise to the entire phenomenon of valuing? And once she tweaks the question like that, it points her directly to the answer. It is only because living beings must achieve certain goals in order to sustain their lives that the necessity of good and evil arise. Nothing could be good or evil for a rock. But for a plant, an animal, a human being, something can be good for it or bad for it. And the good is that which promotes the life of a living being, for that living being, and the evil is that which harms or undermines its life. And this is a matter of hard factual data. Plants have to dig their roots into the soil to gain chemical nutrients. They must grow their leaves towards the sun to get sunlight, and they must get rainwater. These are values that nature stipulates for that species. With it, they could gain eudaimonia, Aristotle, flourishing life. Without it, they die. Similarly, for a lion has got to hunt. The carnivores, they have to have meat. Nature has mandated this of them. For any species, nature sets certain values that sustain that organism's life and certain things that undermine or harm or will kill it. Consequently, the good for any species is that which promotes its life. The evil or the bad is that which harms its life. Now, what that means for us as human beings, as rational animals, what that means is the good is that which promotes the life of a rational being, and the evil is that which harms, factually promotes the life of a rational being, and the evil is that which harms, undermines, or kills it. So, we've already shown that the principle of individual rights protects every individual's ability to pursue what they want in life, an education, a career, love, and so forth. It protects us from the initiation of force against us. It protects our ability to gain those things, values, that make our lives fulfilled. So if the good is that which promotes human life, and individual rights definitely promotes the life of every individual human being, then the principle of individual rights is morally good. Now, a couple of last points before I conclude this. what is the means? Here's another question. What is the fundamental means by which we, as rational beings, can and do fulfill our lives? Or you guys remember the old Star Trek TV series? Mr. Spock was half Vulcan, right? I think his father was Vulcan and his mother was human. I can't do the thing with the hands that they did, but the Vulcan salutation: "May you live long and prosper." You're right. This is great. This is very objective-ish. May you live long and prosper. That's a great salutation. And this is what the principle of individual rights does for us. It enables us to live long and prosper. It promotes human life, which is the essence of the good. Now, by what mechanism, by what means do we promote human life? And this leads us right into the theme of Atlas Shrugged. And if you haven't read Atlas Shrugged, I'm very happy for you, because what that means is you have the opportunity to read it for the first time. But Rand's, we don't have time to discuss the extraordinary plot of Atlas, but the theme. Rand's theme in Atlas Shrugged is that the human mind, human intelligence, is mankind's means of survival. Notice nature endows every species with certain characteristics enabling it to seek survival. Birds have their wings to fly. Lions have their claws and fangs to tear apart the zebras. The zebras have foot speed to outrun the lions. Notice that these other species survive by physicalistic means. They can fly, they have great speed of foot, they have claws and fangs, and so forth. Human beings don't have those kinds of physical characteristics. We can't compete for survival at a physical level with the lions. Let's see by a show of hands, for example, how many people would want to try outrunning a starving lion? Yeah, that's a brave. I don't think Usain Bolt would want to do that. But the world's fastest human. But what nature has endowed us with to seek survival is our intelligence. Man is an intelligent being, which is not to say he always acts so intelligently. But in Aristotle's terms, of course, we have the potential. And Aristotle had pointed out long ago that that we are the rational animal, meaning, and Aristotle, of course, the first great biologist and the first great zoologist that we know of, Aristotle pointed out that we are literally a member of the animal kingdom, just like lions and tigers and bears, oh my. And what fundamentally distinguishes us from the lions and tigers and bears is this: our rational capacity. That this is the fundamental differentiating characteristic that distinguishes human beings from other animals. Well, Rand, very much in the Aristotelian school of philosophy, takes that one step further. Our intelligence, our rational consciousness, is not merely our fundamental differentia. It's also our instrument of survival, and she means that literally, just like wings are for a bird. Thinking is for a human being. Our mind is our means of survival, and every value that human life depends upon is a product of the reasoning mind. Food, for example, which must be grown, which requires knowledge of agricultural science and agricultural technology, which requires rational thinking. Medicines, as a second example, to treat or cure diseases, must be researched and developed, requiring a knowledge of biology and of scientific method, which requires rational consciousness. The buildings that we live in must be built, requiring knowledge of the principles of architecture and engineering and mathematics, which requires rational consciousness. Let me take one last example, moving to a different field. Peace, the possibility of world peace. I know I ask my students if they think world peace is attainable, and uniformly they say no. And I said, well, why not? And they say, well, humans disagree on all different kinds of things. There's always disputes. And I said, well, that's true, and there probably always will be disputes. But what about if we had the idea that we ban the initiation of physical force and we rationally negotiate our ideas? What a concept, right? What an idea. Now, rational negotiations, of course, involves a sincere commitment to rational negotiations on the part of all parties. If there's one or more party that's not sincerely committed to peacefully working out a solution, then rational negotiation is not going to work. Did that recent movie about Churchill, Darkest Hour, did that play in Israel? Yeah. I've seen it 7 times. And I love it. And I could empathize with Chamberlain and Halifax. They want peace. Peace is an enormous value. We want peace. We don't want to go to war. They all lived through the bloodbath of World War I. They don't want to see it again. I can empathize with them. So we negotiate with Hitler. And Churchill, Gary Oldman as Churchill in the film, has an immortal line. He says, when will we learn? How many dictators have to be appeased before we learn you cannot reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth, right? And you can't negotiate with Hitler. It's just not possible. He's not committed to rational negotiations. He's committed to conquest, and enslavement and annihilation. But the principle, of course, is if we can attain world peace, and what would enable that is, only thing that would enable it is a commitment to rational negotiations on the part of all sides to resolve the inevitable disputes that arise, and always will arise, between human beings. So in every possible way, reason is mankind's survival instrument. Every value, from food to medicine to world peace, depends upon reason in some form. Now, the last question I want to raise for tonight is regards the social system. Reasoning is our instrument of survival. Reasoning is the way we survive and flourish in this world. Can the creative, rational mind flourish equally well under any type of social system, or does it require a particular political economic principle? So, but let me give you a few examples. Ayn Rand herself, let's say she wrote and tried to publish Atlas Shrugged in the Soviet Union, where she had grown up. What would have happened to her? Well, she wouldn't have had to try to publish Atlas Shrugged to be sent to a gulag. All she had to do would open her mouth, and the Soviets would send her to a Siberian slave labor camp where her life expectancy would be measured in a matter of months. Here's a good example for you. Supposing Charles Darwin had tried to publish Origin of Species under ISIS. That's kind of funny. You don't think that's funny? Well, obviously they would have burned his book and chopped off his head. One last example, since we know we want less Marx, more Mises. What would have happened to von Mises if he had stayed in Austria during the 1930s? Well, the National Socialists would have killed him just because he was a Jew. But even if he was the most Aryan of Aryans, they would have killed him because of his liberal principles and his free market economics. So a few examples there. We see the free-thinking, creative human mind cannot flourish, can't even survive, much less flourish under any type of dictatorship, whether secular, like the communists or Nazis, or religious, like ISIS. No, Rand's point is, socially, the free-thinking human mind requires the principle of individual rights. It requires your protection, the protection of the thinkers by the government to think on any field, to develop new theories, to write books, to give lectures, to invent technologies, to start their own companies, the freedom to think independently and creatively. The principle of individual rights is a necessary social condition to liberate the human mind, mankind's survival instrument. You can think of it this way. If your life belongs to you, it follows logically that your mind belongs to you, and you are free to think and speak as you will. As long as you do not initiate force or fraud against other people, you are free to think and act on your thinking. Conversely, if your life belongs to the state, then your mind belongs to the state. And the only thinking you may do is that which is permitted by the state. And if you clash with what the state believes or wants you to say, you'll fill in the blank. Exiled, incarcerated, executed, or whatever. So the point then is, capitalism, the system of individual rights, liberates the human mind, mankind's survival instrument. And you will see whenever the principle of individual rights is applied in a society, it will liberate the best members of mankind, those who choose to use their minds. I'll give you one example. Probably the freest, most individualistic period of human history was late 19th century United States. After the 13th Amendment ended slavery in 1865, and before the country started moving towards socialism early in the 20th century, the so-called progressive era, I always agreed with Confucius. See to it that things are called by their right names. There's nothing progressive about socialism. It should be called the regressive era. But there's roughly a 40-year window of where American liberty is at its zenith. And look at the accomplishments. The American historians to this day don't understand it. They call late 19th century America the Gilded Age, as if it was something, as if corruption was the defining essence of the era. No. Tremendous inventiveness and innovativeness was the defining essence of late 19th century America. You see Thomas Edison, and the electric light and the electric lighting system, Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone, the Wright brothers and aviation, the creation of the distinctively American contribution to architecture, the skyscraper. John Roebling, the German immigrant, and the perfection of the suspension bridge and his masterpiece, the Brooklyn Bridge. You can go on and on with the technological accomplishments. Henry Ford, of course, revolutionized his personal industry, personal transportation by mass-producing the automobile. You could go on and on with the accomplishments in applied science and technology. But Rand's point is individual rights applied in a society liberates the human mind in every field. So notice in the humanities, literature, 19th century America, small country, small population, young country, but a great national body of literature. Nathaniel Hawthorne, Edgar Allan Poe, Mark Twain, Walt Whitman, Herman Melville, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and continuing into the 20th century with such great novelists as Ernest Hemingway, William Faulkner, and I would argue the still underappreciated Russian immigrant Alyssa Rosenbaum, Ayn Rand, who wrote the two greatest novels in world literature, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, which is a judgment. I will stand by that judgment until the day I die. In any field you want to mention, William James at Harvard revolutionizes the field of cognitive theoretical psychology in late 19th century America. Where was the film industry born? Early 20th century America, by penniless Russian immigrants, Jewish immigrants, overwhelmingly, by the way, who moved out to Hollywood early in the 20th century. Why? It's funny today. You know why they left New York for Hollywood? To escape regulation. That's funny. I mean, that's funny. California today is the most fascist state in the country, and the film industry promotes it. They promote socialism, but that. I'm not making this up. But anyways, it was early 20th century America. The radio was invented by Marconi, a European. But where'd Marconi go to commercialize radio? Well, he went to America. RCA, or the Radio Corporation of America, I think was founded on Marconi's American patent to the radio. And all through the early 20th century, RCA, the Radio Corporation of America, was working on the development of television. which became commercially feasible after World War II. I can go on and on with this, but the point is, and the advances in medicine, and that have been made in the United States. But anyway, the point is, the principle of individual rights liberates the best thinkers in any society, in any field, to create advances. So let me wrap this up by saying this. By conclusion, the requirements of human life on Earth are the standard of moral value. Our rational thinking is the means by which we promote human life, and capitalism, the system of individual rights, liberates the human mind to create unsurpassed intellectual and material wealth, benefiting human life in every way. Anywhere in the world, in Israel, in Tanzania, in Cambodia, where if what's needed to see flourishing life are two things. We need a culture committed to reason, to mankind's survival instrument, and we need a politics of individual rights. If we establish those two things in any society, just stand back and watch the torrent of creativity and the creation of intellectual and material wealth anywhere on Earth that will enormously benefit human life. Thank you.